All right, it's time now for part 3 of my 2012 Oklahoma Sooner preview. We've already talked about the offense and the defense and special teams on parts 1 and 2, but now this is the final part of my OU preview. We're going to break down the schedule, and I'll give you my predictions on Oklahoma at the end of the show. Last season, if you watched my Oklahoma schedule breakdown, you know that I ranked Oklahoma's games from easiest to toughest. But this year, we're going to change things up. In chronological order, I'll go over all 12 of OU's games, and I'll give each game a particular rating. It's called the concern meter. If I give it a 1, that means you shouldn't be concerned at all. OU should be able to win that game easily and eat a ham sandwich while doing it. Number 2, you should be a little concerned. That means that OU's opposition does some things pretty darn good, but as far as the whole, they're not going to be able to match up with OU. Number 3, be concerned. That means that this team does more than just a few things right. They do quite a few things right, and if OU doesn't play up to par, a loss is not out of the question. And then number 4, talking about be very concerned. This means even if Oklahoma plays its best ball, they're not guaranteed of a win. That's because the team they're playing has just as much talent, or the game could be away from Norman or a combination of the two. So pretty much that would be the highest on the concern meter, number 4. All right, now let's go ahead and break down OU's schedule, beginning with the opener, which will be on the road. That's right, Texas El Paso, the Miners. It'll be a 9:30 kickoff on Saturday, September the 1st. I think that's kind of a good thing because it gets pretty darn hot in South Texas during this time of the year. So having this game played under the lights at night, I think will negate much of that heat factor. Last season, UTEP was 5-7. In fact, they've had 6 consecutive losing seasons under Mike Price, and somehow he still has a job there. You might remember he was head coach at Washington State the year that OU beat Washington State in the Rose Bowl. Last season, UTEP was a balanced attack. But the problem is entering this year, they will not have their top 3 rushers from a year ago. And just like the Sooners, UTEP has had their shares of preseason injuries. This is not a good matchup at all for the Miners. Last year, they gave up about 30 points per ball game. So how can you expect them to stop Landry Jones and company, not to mention the ground attack? I'll look for OU to win and win this game comfortably and start the season 1-0. All right, we get to the home opener, Florida A&M. Now, TCU was supposed to have been a non-league game for OU this year, but because TCU is now in the Big 12, this left Oklahoma with only 5 home games, and that left the Sooners with only 11 games overall. So for that 12th game, they were scrambling for an opponent. Florida A&M said, yeah, we'll come to Norman. When do we come, and how much will be our paycheck? Well, that's the only reason why Florida A&M is coming to Norman is to get a nice paycheck. They did go 7-4 last season, but Florida A&M is not even an FBS member. They're an FCS member. They play in the MEAC conference. Last season, they scored about 4 touchdowns a game and gave about 3 TDs per ball game. This is one of those games where the biggest concern for OU will be to avoid the injury bug, and this should be a game where you see a lot of the second and third teamers play in the third and fourth quarter, and possibly even earlier than that if OU can get the game put away pretty soon. Look for the Sooners to be able to name their score against the Rattlers. Now we get into the Big 12 part of the season. After a bye week on September the 22nd, Oklahoma will host Kansas State. Last season it was a top 10 matchup, and after a tight first half, OU turned the lights out in the second half. Be a little bit concerned because of that zone read offense. Colin Klein runs it pretty darn well. And also on defense, be aware of Arthur Brown and also be aware of Nigel Malone. They're terrific players. But this is one of those games where Kansas State has some players who can play, but offensively and defensively as a whole, it's going to be hard for them to match up with the Sooners. Last season, the Sooners, I thought, did a pretty good job against the zone read. And remember, this year they'll have 2 weeks to prepare for this particular ball game. Look for Oklahoma to win this game by at least 17 points. Be a little bit concerned about Lubbock, and you pretty much need to be because the last 3 trips to Lubbock have been bad ones for the Sooners. They've lost every time. They haven't won in West Texas since Mike Stoops was defensive coordinator there the first time. That was back in 2003. The reason why I put this as being a little concerned and not concerned in general is because last year's game, I think, now has Oklahoma's undivided attention. The 39-game home winning streak snapped thanks to Texas Tech, and OU at that time was #1 in the BCS. Even though the Texas game is the following week for the Sooners, I don't think there's a way at all that Oklahoma overlooks the Red Raiders. Remember, Texas Tech still has some issues on the defensive side of the ball. They give up way too many yardage, way too many points, and I think offensively Tech will be able to have some success, but they're not going to have as much success as they did the year before. Oklahoma will not overlook the Red Raiders, and they'll get revenge on Texas Tech and finally win at AT&T Stadium. And then we get to the Texas Longhorns. That's right, second Saturday in October, the Red River rivalry. Be concerned about this game because this will be the best defense that Oklahoma will face all season long. The defensive ends will do their best to try to make life havoc for Landry Jones. That's Jackson Jeffcoat and the All-American Alex Okafor. Texas defensively will be tough once again. They were #1 in total D last year in the conference. And offensively, Texas features a potent running attack and a terrific offensive line. Still, though, Oklahoma will be favored to win this game because of Landry Jones and because of that ground attack. And also remember, too, that Texas has yet to prove in quite some time that they can beat teams by throwing the football. So be concerned because it's a rivalry game. And in years in which OU has blown Texas out, which happened last year, the following year the game has been a whole lot more competitive. I would say Oklahoma right now is at least a touchdown better than Texas. And the Sooners coming back home for the first time since September as they will host the Kansas Jayhawks. And the Sooners returning at home for the first time since September as they'll take on the Kansas Jayhawks. Look, there's a reason why the Kansas Jayhawks are picked to finish dead last in the Big 12. They're no good. There you go. Charlie Weiss is the head coach, and maybe in a few years Kansas will be more of a competitive ball club. But not this year. The game's in Norman. Kansas's defense is terrible, and offensively they're not going to have enough. This will be a lopsided game. Look for Oklahoma to cruise against the Jayhawks. And now the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Historically wise, this is a terrific matchup because of the number of national championships both teams have amassed. And over the course of history, Notre Dame has been an absolute thorn in Oklahoma's side. But this year, this matchup favors Oklahoma completely, and you have to wonder the health of Notre Dame entering this game because by the time we get to this game, which will be October 27th, Notre Dame will have already played Michigan, Michigan State, as well as Miami, Stanford, and BYU. 5 pretty good teams. So you have to wonder how banged up Notre Dame's going to be entering this matchup in Norman. Now, Notre Dame's got some terrific talent. All-American linebacker Manti Te'o, as well as an All-American type at tight end in Tyler Eifert. 2 guys who could have gone to the NFL if they so desired, but came back another year for Brian Kelly's team. Be a little bit concerned because of the fact that Notre Dame does have some talent that could cause OU some fits. But as a whole, OU is better playing the game at home, and I believe Oklahoma should be able to handle the Fighting Irish in this game. Well, for the first time since 2007, that's 5 years, it's been that long since Oklahoma has played a game in Ames, Iowa. Of course, 5 years ago, that game was an absolute mess. OU won the game, but it didn't really feel like much of a win. It was 17-7. OU struggled like crazy in that one. But that was 5 years ago, and I look for Iowa State to have lots of fits with the Sooners. Pretty much of a plain Jane vanilla offense that Iowa State runs, and defensively, other than the linebackers, there's not much cause for concern at all. Oklahoma should be able to win this game and win it easily, and then they get ready for an interesting stretch in 3 of their last 4 games. The Baylor Bears, one of 3 teams to have defeated Oklahoma last season, but this Baylor team's not going to look like the one of a year ago, and it helps too that you get this game in Norman. This will be a high-scoring matchup. Nick Florence, by this time of the season, should be a better quarterback than what we see in the beginning. But the bottom line is that Baylor is going to have to be able to run successfully, and I think OU's run defense will do just fine. Look for the OU defense to bend a little bit against Baylor, but not break, and look for the OU offense to be able to score quite a few points. OU will get revenge on Baylor, and will do so in convincing fashion. But this, to me, is the toughest of the 12 games on the schedule. West Virginia is going to be pretty darn good. Their offense with Geno Smith and an offensive-minded head coach, Dana Holgorsen. This game, I wouldn't be surprised if it was moved to prime time, and I also wouldn't be surprised if ESPN's College Game Day visits Morgantown. That place will be absolutely psychotic. It's going to be very loud, and I think it's going to be a high-scoring showdown for both squads. Those wide receivers for West Virginia are scary. Geno Smith, preseason All-Big 12 first-team quarterback, scary as well. And it's just one of those things where don't be surprised if OU enters this game undefeated, and unfortunately don't be surprised if they walk out with the loss. It's not to say that they can't win the game, but because of West Virginia's offense, because it's in Morgantown, and because in all likelihood it'll be a night game, look for this to be the most difficult game the Sooners face for the entire season. Yeah, I'd be concerned about this game because it is Bedlam. Of course, we can't forget what the Cowboys did to the Sooners last year. Offensively and defensively, it was a mismatch. If it were a boxing match, it would have been stopped. OSU won the game convincingly and won the Big 12. It helps, though, this year that you get the game in Norman for the first time in this decade. It also helps that you're not going to have Brandon Whedon, Justin Blackman, or Josh Cooper to face. It's going to be a different Oklahoma State squad. They'll still have a pretty good running game, and the defense, don't be surprised if they're still opportunistic. Last year led the country in takeaway as well as turnover margin. So those are things to think about. But the Sooners will need a victory to keep their Big 12 hopes alive, and I think they get it. I think Landry Jones will go out on a bang, and even though OSU's good, I don't think they're as good as last year's team. So, OSU, OU, it's Bedlam. Should be a fun game, but I'll look for the Sooners to prevail. And you close out the season with a tough one. Be concerned about this one because it's in Fort Worth against TCU. The Horned Frogs, we saw what they did in their biggest game a year ago, in which they weren't given much of a shot to win at Boise State, who had that massive home winning streak on the blue field, and TCU pulled it off, won the game, ending any shot at any national championship talk with the Boise State Broncos, and TCU ended up winning the Mountain West in their last year in that league. Casey Paha broke a school record for most touchdown passes in a season, so you know the team offensively is going to be tough for OU to contain. Be concerned because you're going against Gary Patterson, Casey Paha, and a good TCU squad, but defensively, TCU is not as good as what we've seen in years past. OU needs a victory to win the Big 12 Conference, and I believe it'll be tough, but they'll get the job done and close out the year as Big 12 champions. Okay, my prediction for the Oklahoma Sooners for the 2012 season. Look, there are enough playmakers, Landry Jones, Kenny Stills, a loaded backfield, as well as playmakers on the defensive side in order for the Sooners to win another Big 12 championship. They are the favorites to do so this season. And you also have a coach in Bob Stoops who's won 7 of these conference titles and the return of Mike Stoops as defensive coordinator, which will help the defense. How much? We'll have to wait and see. I cannot see Oklahoma not having a double-digit winning regular season. I think they're going to win at least 10 ball games. Having said everything I've said, though, I do think, though, that they're going to get beat this season. I don't think they're going to go undefeated. To me, I've got some question marks as far as the inside of that offensive line. Losing Ben Habron, losing Tyler Evans hurts big time. Do not kid yourself. And then defensively, last season gave up way too many big plays. Having Mike Stoops back helps, but I don't think it completely eliminates the problem of coverages. And you're going to face a great offense like West Virginia and Geno Smith, who threw for well over 4,000 yards a year ago. That game in Morgantown, that game probably in prime time, and that game was so much national implications in it possibly for both teams. I think that's the one game that's going to give Oklahoma the most difficulty. I think Oklahoma goes 11-1 this season. I think West Virginia beats Oklahoma, but I think the Mountaineers will lose a couple of games somewhere. So I look for the Sooners to win another Big 12 championship and go to the Fiesta Bowl. And for my national championship pick, I've got LSU defeating USC. That's my look at the Oklahoma Sooners as far as the schedule and as far as my predictions for 2012. All of our preview shows are in the books. Now we can get ready for the weekly matchup show, which I'll have in a few days, probably Monday or Tuesday, as we'll break down OU's season opener against Texas El Paso. Boomer Sooner.